Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking Down Braves Boys podcast. It's been a while, been gone for the majority of the summer, and no news has really broke since the Dom Campbell commitment. So, not too much to talk about and haven't had much time, but now that I'm back in school, I should be able to get some stuff going again, and I'll probably be getting a job soon. So, that's unfortunate, but I'll definitely have some more content coming out as the weeks go on, and especially towards the season, stuff will start coming out. Hopefully, Notre Dame's schedule comes out. But today, I wanted to talk about recruiting before things start to heat up during football season. Also, wanted to touch on summer practices, which ended a few weeks ago. Notre Dame's going to return to campus in probably 2 or 3 weeks, maybe next week. I don't know the exact date. It's not as important this year as it was last year. I'll try to get that at some point, though. But Notre Dame has one commitment in the class of 22. Like I mentioned earlier, Dom Campbell. Really nice addition, top 150 player in my eyes, and I think a few sites have him listed as that. I have a full video on him in it was my last video that I posted, so definitely check that out if you want to learn more about Notre Dame's newest commitment. But since then, things have really quieted down on the trail. Notre Dame has lost Donovan Clingan, Alex Caravan, both went to UConn. Denver Anglin, who was a point guard they offered a couple weeks before his commitment, had a nice showing at Peach Jam, but he ultimately ended up at Georgetown. Another top 50, 150 type guy. Clingan, I think, was probably a top 50 player in the class in my eyes. Caravan, fringe top 100 guy to me. And then they also lost Braden Moore to Rutgers, who I think they kind of cooled off on once they got the commitment from Dom. And then Kyle Filipowski, who I guess they never really had a shot with after maybe even last summer. I think was kind of the point where I was like, all right, this is done here. Top 30 player in the class by pretty much every site. Committed to Duke, kind of got outclassed there, but those losses kind of lead me into something I wanted to talk about, which is Notre Dame's strategy during this class. I think it's been a little different than with other classes in the past, and I actually like what I've seen from them. So I'll just kind of go through what I've seen. To start, they offered guys like Don Clingan, Kyle Filipowski, Isaac Trout, guys who weren't super highly ranked back then, and some of them had connections to Notre Dame. Well, none of those three did, but there's other guys they offered like Jarris Walker. What's the guy's first? Bradley from IMG. I forget his first name. But those guys are essentially off their board now just because they have crystal balls elsewhere and Notre Dame doesn't really seem to be a player. But offer big guys like that, especially guys with connections to Notre Dame early in the class, and then kind of move your way down the board as things go on. I think in 2019, when they didn't end up with anybody, they kind of got hung up with guys like Hunter Dickinson too early and then just rode it with them through the class and never really put together a backup plan, it felt like. But now I think, we've already seen it with Dom Campbell, that they do have a backup plan, and they did a nice job adjusting to that and moving on, especially with the new staff in place. I'm sure that made it a little more difficult, but it also probably helped having guys like Anthony Solomon to come bring a new perspective into the staff. And on the recruiting trail, they have offered a few more guys since Solomon and Weiche have been added to the staff. But I do like what I've seen from the staff in general with their outlook on this class. They do have their priorities, and some of these guys have been going after for a while, like J.J. Starling and Rodney Rice. But especially with big men, they've moved on well to kind of fill out the class with type. It's not necessarily even like backup guys. It's just guys that Notre Dame has landed in the past rather than high star guys. I don't want to put the pressure on Dom of living up to a Bonzie Colson comparison. I talked a little bit about that in the last video, but Bonzie was the type of guy Notre Dame normally gets, a guy who's under the radar, a guy who has I don't know if Bonzie necessarily had connections to Notre Dame coming out, but guys who play in areas that Notre Dame's familiar with, Notre Dame recruits well. Campbell fits that mold, has connections with Cormac Ryan, Pat Connaughton's AAU program, plays in the Northeast, the place Notre Dame recruits well. So Notre Dame can always get those guys. This was a particularly good one in my opinion, but Notre Dame can always get those guys. It's cool to take a shot early on higher ranked guys early in the class. So just wanted to touch on what I thought of Notre Dame's recruiting efforts in this class in general. But now I guess I'll get a little more specific into kind of how they can finish the class to go along with their big man who's a top 150 type guy. So to start, point guard, I think that's pretty much the biggest need in this class. You got 3 guys with offers out right now, J.J. Starling, Rodney Rice, who both, in my opinion, are top 70, 80 type players by the time the class finishes. And then Desmond Cloud, who is a top 150 guy right now in my eyes. And then eventually I think will probably sneak his way into the back half of the top 100, but we'll see. Kind of a guy who just came onto the scene. I think could end up having a really nice season and picking up some more offers. But for now, those are the offers. I think Starling and Rice are the 2 guys they're really going after. They've been going after those guys forever. I think Denver England was also a guy who they liked, but I think Starling and Rice are the 2 guys that they really want right now, 2 guys that they're going to take commitments from whenever they want. For Rice, they've made the top 6 list with a few other schools, and then Starling hasn't cut his list yet, but took 2 unofficials to Notre Dame and has taken visits elsewhere. I would hope that they get both those guys on campus for officials in September. The only guy they took in the summer was Dom, and that worked out for him. So I think September is generally when Bray seems to like having guys, maybe not just September, the football season in general, but you like having guys in that atmosphere. And I think Starling, Rice, and probably even Cloud are all going to be guys who come on campus. Those 2 top guys, I think Starling may be more of a long shot than we originally had thought. As a Duke offer now, it seems like Duke's actually interested in him. It's not just like a offer you throw out and then put guys above him in your priority list. I think Starling's a guy Duke could actually land. Rodney Rice has future casts and crystal balls elsewhere. I know he had a future cast to Louisville, and I think he has a crystal ball to Virginia Tech. Let me look that up real quick. I don't take much from crystal balls at this point in the process, though. Before he takes his fall visits, I think he's going to end up doing that, especially because he's cut his list. I think he would have committed by now if he wasn't. But Rice is a guy who I think Notre Dame, he has 1 prediction, crystal ball to Virginia Tech. So that's definitely interesting to see. But he has a connection there with one of the DeMatha coaches who's now an assistant at Virginia Tech. But Notre Dame does have connections also. Seems to have a really good relationship with Rodney and his family. It's just whether they can get him on campus and sell him there. It's going to be tough to overcome a school like Virginia Tech, who, like I said, has the connection to one of his former high school coaches. But Notre Dame definitely could be a player here, and I think they probably have a better chance with Rice than they do with Starling as of now. Cloud's a bit of a unknown for now. It seems to be more early in his process than Rice or Starling. Hasn't really taken visits, just kind of blew up this summer on the circuit. Doesn't have any like super huge offers, but Notre Dame is definitely a player there if they want him. I think Notre Dame can make a run there and potentially get him. Right now, when these guys would be freshmen, Notre Dame has Cormac Ryan, Trey Wirtz, Blake Wesley, Dane Goodwin, Robbie Carmody, JR, Alex Wade, and Elijah Morgan. And then Prentice Hub could use an extra year of eligibility also if he wants to use his 5th year. So they're going to be okay there if they don't land one of these guys. It's nice to see they have some cushion with 2 guys who can handle the ball in Cormac and Wirtz. And then maybe even a guy like JR, Blake, or maybe one of the walk-ons could help kind of in spurts to handle the ball. But I think ideally you'd have one of these guys come in, handle the ball, and run the offense for a little bit, even as freshmen. And then when these guys are sophomores, that's when you really need one. Basically all you have is Blake Wesley, potentially Robbie Carmody, JR, and the walk-ons at guard right now. And that's if you consider JR Knesny a guard. So you definitely need a guy. I would hope that if they don't get a guy in this class, they end up with a transfer that can come in and play in 2 years, maybe even this year, just to help handle the ball and let Cormac and Wirtz go to the wing. That's assuming Prentice doesn't come back, though, which I guess the door is still open for him to end up at Notre Dame again for a 5th year. But they have to get a point guard in this class or in the portal this spring, in my opinion. Moving on to combo guard, they have one offer out. A guy Jameel Brown, thinks also a top 150 player. Reminds me of like a mix of TJ Gibbs and Dane Goodwin, kind of like TJ Gibbs with his athleticism and quickness a little closer to Dane Goodwin. I think Notre Dame would also be interested in taking him. That would be an interesting class with him and Dom to start. Guy who can really shoot, one of the better shooters in the class. I don't know if he's as naturally a point guard as JJ or Rodney is, or even Desmond Cloud. I think those guys are more point guards than Brown is right now. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to put him like in a different conversation than those guys, because I don't know how much those guys will necessarily affect Brown, because I think he's just a different player. It's like having TJ Gibbs versus Demetrius Jackson on your roster. Not perfect there, but I think it's just different guys. So Brown is a guy who I think Notre Dame has a chance with if they want him. Former Purdue commit. Penn State's also a big player there, and I think Minnesota's also a player. But Jameel Brown is a guy who Notre Dame, I think, has a nice shot with. And I'd love to see him in the season when he's more of a focal point on his team. This summer he played for Team Final, who won Peach Jam. But he was more of like the 6th, 7th man who was a spot-up shooter mostly. I'd love to see kind of how his offensive game transitions when there's not as many good players on the team. And I think that maybe that'll be where he picks up more offers, or where teams decide whether they want to take him or not. Moving on to wing, Notre Dame has 2 offers out, Ty Rogers and Cam Whitmore. Rogers has crystal balls to Michigan. Love his game. I just don't know how realistic it is. They came on pretty late with him, so I'm not 100% sure that they have any shot there. Cam Whitmore, I think, is a little more intriguing in terms of a guy they could land, has connections to Notre Dame. But what I thought was more interesting is that it just shows they want to wing with the offer of Rogers. That's more important than actually offering Rogers, in my opinion. They could probably make this class 3 or 4 guys along with Dom. So ideally there's a wing in there, and ideally it's Cam Whitmore, a guy who is a top 100 player to me, and a guy who has potential to be even more than that. A guy who has potential to be even a top 30, 40 player if he can have a great year. Just has so much athleticism, can do a lot for you. I think he just needs to keep developing offensively, be more of a natural wing. And then this is a guy who is a really hot commodity. Had a great weekend, picked up a UNC offer earlier this summer. One of the better individual performances I've seen in a while from a high schooler. So Cam Whitmore's definitely got to watch. I don't necessarily know Notre Dame's chances, but they did make a list cut. I think it was a pretty big list that was like 8 or 11. And then for bigs, Dom Campbell fills the need. But looking at the rosters down the line, the only guys they have after this year guaranteed, Nate Laz can still come back. But the only guys they have guaranteed is Zona Taylor and Dom. Nobody's 6'10" or over. I'd love to see them go after another taller big, like a 6'11", 7-footer, or a transfer, which I think is probably more likely because you want to get a guy who's more college ready, especially with the new eligibility rules. But I think Dom was a really good pickup. I already talked about him a lot, but that's a great way to start off your class, bringing in physicality, a guy who can stretch the floor. But now I'd love to see them get somebody who can complement him. I think that's more likely the transfer portal, like I said. But as of now, a dream class for me, I'd say, is JJ Starling, Jameel Brown, Dom, and then Cam Whitmore, so you take 4. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen, but I think something like that is, I don't know if it's super realistic, but it could happen. I mean, I think it's more likely that Notre Dame lands a guy like Cloud, Rice, Dom, and then Whitmore, I think, is a bit of a wild card right now. Depends on how UNC treats him, but just really hard to get a gauge. I think we'll start to see more movement with recruits in the fall before the season and during football season when they take their visits. But not a whole lot right now that I can say. There's not a whole lot happening. So I'll move on to summer practices. Also, not a whole lot I can say, but there was some interesting stuff that happened. Media Day had some interesting comments. So I'll just go over a few. Bray was talking about Paul Atkinson. Seems like he's better defensively than I originally thought. I thought he was going to be a good defender. He won't get back down as easy as Juwan Durham. It's nice to have a guy with a body like that down low who's just going to be more physical. Atkinson said that he wants to become more of an outside shooter. So that's going to be cool to see if Notre Dame can finally have a guy like that. But the number one thing I kind of took away from the pressers was it seems like the offense is flowing through Atkinson a bit more. We haven't really seen that with Juwan Durham. We saw it a bit with Mooney, but Atkinson can find cutters. He can cut himself. He can work with his back to the basket. Now maybe he can shoot a little bit. So Notre Dame has a lot more flexibility there to kind of have a secondary facilitator like the Bulls have with Nikola Vucevic or the Nuggets have with Jokic. Just the offense isn't being solely led by your guards. You're having bigs who can create for their teammates and create for themselves too. So I love that idea of Atkinson kind of being a secondary distributor. And hopefully that actually materializes. Some bad news to contrast that. It doesn't seem like Robbie Carmody's practiced yet. I haven't seen him anywhere in any videos. Hopefully everything's good with him and we'll see him in the fall, but I didn't see him at all in the summer. So hopefully things are good with him and he can end up coming back. But I'm going to end it off with some better news. High praise for Blake Wesley from Mike Bray. Bray talked about his feel for the game, how he doesn't force anything, knows how to play with other guys. This is really awesome for me to hear. I was concerned about this coming into the year. Based on the lack of D1 guys he played with / against at Riley, I noticed that he forced a lot his junior year. And then over the summer when he started playing with better players last summer, you could really see that wasn't the guy that Blake Wesley is. And then this year really improved his playmaking and shot selection, and it seems like that's carried over. So been awesome to see, awesome to hear how Blake has developed. And if he can play with other good players, then he's good to go. He has all the talent to play as a freshman, all the defense you need, has the ceiling to be the best defender on the team. And this year, in my opinion, as a freshman. So love what I've heard out of summer practices for the most part, but you normally do. Last fall we heard about how Matt Zona was like the second coming of John Mooney, it seemed like, but that didn't really materialize last year, and maybe it will this year. But that's all I have. Notre Dame guys are in the summer league, haven't had great showings yet, but been cool to see them. So maybe I'll do an update with them soon, and hopefully we get something to talk about again. So thank you guys for watching. Go Irish. Peace.